Good morning. Morning to those of you in the room and those of you online. We have got many people joining us online this morning. Welcome to this wonderful space. I think you'll agree it is a fantastic view. I've not seen a view quite as panoramic in many of the offices I've been in. But good morning, I'm Claire Tunley. I'm the Chief Executive of the Financial Services Skills Commission. And I really want to welcome you all to the launch of our report, Reskilling Everywhere All at Once. It's great to see so many of you made it here. Before we start with some general housekeeping, there is no fire alarm planned. I understand it was actually planned for midday, but they've moved it forward. So it's already happened this morning. But if there is an alarm, it is one that we need to pay attention to. So we will follow a Lloyds member of staff to the designated point. If you're in the room, please turn off mobile phones. I think that's it. You probably all found the coffee in the toilets. Those of you at home, hope you found the coffee in the toilets as well. If you don't know the Financial Services Skills Commission, we're a not-for-profit membership body working with the UK financial services sector to build the skills and talent it needs for the future. Since establishing in 2020, we've grown. We've now got 39 members, I'm pleased to say, and they employ around a third of the UK's financial services workforce. We work with our members to build the skills that they need, identify those gaps, build the skills we need, and help them close those gaps. And I really want to thank all of our members for their support. It is a collaboration. So all of the members work together to identify the challenges, identify solutions. So thank you to all of the members, and particularly our permanent members, the City of London Corporation and the City of UK. So we look at skills forecasting, we look at business cases, we look at inclusion, we look at issues such as the menopause, all focusing on how tackling these challenges can help us build skills. But core to our work is forecasting and then identifying those skills that the sector really needs and building a future skills framework to help guide our reskilling efforts. We really do advocate for structured skills forecasting. We've built a toolkit to support this. And I'm pleased to say that we're seeing increasing number of firms forecast the skills they need. And also the length of time their forecasting skills needs for is growing. Used to be much lower, around 1 or 2 years. Now it's getting more like 3 or 5 years ahead. And today we're using the data that we've had from our member firms to publish our report, Reskilling Everywhere All at Once. And the clues in the title, we need to do a lot of reskilling in many places. It really does mark a milestone for our work, and our findings come at a time where we're facing acute skills challenges, some of the highest vacancy levels that we've ever seen in financial services, higher than many other sectors. And the changes in tech continue to drive changes in skills needs. I don't think anyone was talking about ChatGPT 6 months ago, and here we are, we're always talking about it. What is the impact it's going to have on our business models? What's the impact on the skills we need? How can it support learning? There are opportunities as well as question marks. And building skills is vital if we're going to remain competitive on the world stage. And so I'm really, really pleased that we're producing this report. It updates our analysis on the skills that are important and where we are on supply and demand for those skills. Now I'm very pleased to hand over to Sharon Doherty, Chief People and Places Officer for Lloyds Bank, and a board member and sponsor for this piece of work. Thank you.
You can hear me. Super. Welcome to Lloyds Banking Group. This is a building we'll have for a little while, and then we'll move to an even nicer building, and we'll invite you back. So we're just in the middle of a refurb. I'm the Chief People and Places Officer here. I've been with Lloyds for about just under a year. I feel a bit like a fraud. I came in and this fantastic report was sort of put right in front of me. So I represent absolutely everyone else's work, but I came in the sort of last moment of the strike before midnight, so I want to get the opportunity to stand here. But I don't come from financial services, so it's interesting for me to now be inside, looking at all the things that we need to do or trying to do, and to be part of this fantastic community. And I really sort of want to thank the team that pull us all together, because I think the challenges we face are an industry set of challenges, and I think all of us need to work together, because individuals will not solve some of what we've got to do. I have a story in 3 slides, and then I'm going to hand over to a fantastic panel that will answer some great questions, and then I think take some questions from the room. So my story if we can, I think I just say, can you move to the next slide? Is that how it works? Yeah. This is a story. I'm sure we all have our versions of this story, and probably the real lesson is how do we have many, many more of them. So Caroline has worked for Lloyds Banking Group for 13 years. She works near our Bristol. In our Bristol area, and was in one of our branches there, and she's been with us and worked through customer mortgage advisors, business banking, and lots of different roles, and actually had a pretty good career in Lloyds Banking Group, but she got stuck. Yeah, and probably we're all sitting here feeling we've had that feeling in our careers. We got stuck, and she was stuck, and she was stuck as a biochemist who had an MA as well. And she couldn't figure out how she could move her life on for herself and her family. And then one day she was on our workday site, and an opportunity came up, and it came up to do a reskilling 8-week program to be reskilled in sort of almost tier 1 technology, and then a 16-week work experience. And I chatted to Caroline, and she talked to me about the journey that she'd gone on. And she said it changed her life. Yeah, and when you sort of hear those stories, you think that's, why you're a people and places officer, isn't it? That's why you do your job. And it's changed her life because she's now got a different career path. And actually, she's talking to me about the next job in technology that she was thinking of applying for. And she's earning more money, and she's got more choices for her and her family. And that feeling of being stuck isn't where she is anymore. Yeah. Now, the challenge for all of us is, how, as I said, how do we make Caroline not small numbers, but large numbers? And we probably, like you, are trying to figure out how do we reskill more people in our organisation? So how do we get to tens, hundreds, thousands? And that's really the challenge that we're all in the middle of. So if we go to the next slide. You know this better than me. Financial services 8% of UK GDP. Unfortunately, we're in a country right now that isn't growing fast enough. It's not as productive as we would all like it to be. And really, there are a few things that we have to do to find a way out of that. But one of the significant things that we have to do is to focus on skills reskilling, particularly technology skills. So that we can make UK PLC a more productive country, that we all, as important companies and organisations in it, can then play our part and can prosper. And I think that is, the burning platform in the context of a global race, really, and we are not as well placed as we would like to be. And I think we'll have all come today looking at the news and Microsoft sort of damning the UK. Yeah, I mean that those are really uncomfortable headlines. And maybe the regulator's doing the right thing. Yeah, but we don't have enough credits in the bank to sort of brush those sort of headlines off. But we need to be a UK PLC as the business, and whilst we're struggling to compete with other parts of the world for the volume of engineers, we need to be highly skilled engineers that are can have game-changing interventions. But also the number of people with those skills just needs to be more than it is today. If we go to the next slide. So the report, lots of organisations, many of you here, over 20, I think, have been involved in helping pull a really informative report together. If you haven't read it, do. It just helps us all understand how are we doing in the context of UK PLC financial services. I don't know who's here from NatWest, but they've led the charge on helping us define what the 13 skills are. And then really we can just sort of see we've got a massive reskilling agenda that we all need to do, and we're probably falling short. Yeah, and I'll put my hands up and say, we're falling short, we've got to do more. And I think probably we all need to recognise that. And what is the more? It's many things, but it's also including focus and investment. And I think the report, challenges us with stats and thoughts and ideas on what we can do as an organisation. If we look at a small case study of Lloyds, if we go to the next slide. So on this side, whatever that side is for you, my right, we're all doing stuff, aren't we? So we're all doing training programs, apprenticeships. We're very proud. We hit our 10,000th apprentice in 10 years. So these are all really, really good things that everyone here will be doing their version of. But the challenge that I would have to both my organisation and to us, it's not enough. Yeah, running training programs isn't enough. We're at a moment in time now where we have to change the system. Yeah, and the conversations that we've been having in Lloyds is we need a much more robust strategic workforce plan that has to be connected into the business processes. Yes, we need to do loads of things to figure out how we become a skills-based organisation, and that's your job families. That's how you're hiring, that's how you're performance managing and rewarding. For sure, it's how you're training, how you're reskilling. But we're at a moment in time now with a burning platform where we need to move the skills agenda to being a much, much more systemic agenda. It is not a HR agenda, it's too important. This is a strategic business agenda that I think many of us in the people function are enabling and supporting, but it needs to move up a notch. And I think the report really sets that challenge incredibly well. And the call to action that the report shares, if we move to the final slide, is really, really clear. Skills need to be a business and board priority. It needs to be part of the business planning cycle and a challenge. And I know it's tough because we're in a moment of real cost of living challenge that is impacting companies clearly as well as individuals. But in that moment, I would say we have to prioritise as organisations, and one of the priorities has to be skills. Because if we are not focusing on skills today, then we are not ready for today, and I think we probably are not ready for today, if we've been really honest with UK PLC, and for sure we won't be ready for tomorrow. And the context in which we're all operating is many other parts of the world are running really hard at this, and if we don't, we're just going to keep slipping down the league table. And as I said, yes, we as all as individual companies need to pull up our socks, do more, make this part of a strategic agenda inside our organisations, but also figure out how we work with yourselves to have an industry perspective and move forward together to support financial services. So thank you for coming. It's a pleasure to host you, and as I said, real pleasure to be part of the community that you're pulling together. And I'll now hand over to a really exciting panel with nutty questions that will be answered, and then an opportunity for an open Q&A. Mark.
That's great. Sharon, thank you very much for that, and really sort of giving us a great context to the Q&A session we're going to have now. And I think, Sharon, I like your first slide particularly, because actually, when we can make skills quite a dry topic, we can think about workforce change, we can think about how we meet the challenges of new technology, but actually the difference we make to people's lives that really inspires us, I think, along this journey. And we are seeing a financial service sector going through a huge period of change. And it's our responsibility as employers, as HR professionals, as board members, to drive that change so actually people can see a path to their role in this future FS sector. So we're going to have a panel discussion now. Each of my panelists are going to speak for 2 or 3 minutes about what this report means for them and their firm. And then we're going to have a Q&A session. I've got some questions. I'm sure people in the room have some questions. I've also got on my phone the Teams chat box. For those of you watching this remotely, please tap into the Teams chat box and I will come back to you. And those of you in the room who are shy, I expect not many of you are, you could also put in the Teams chat box. So let me introduce the panelists first. So I've got, you've sat in the right order, that's great. Katie Casper, who's the head of HR for Capital One. Katie's worked for Capital One for about 10 years in people roles, both here in the UK and in the States. So that's great to have that transatlantic experience. I've got Jig Ramji, who is the group head of talent at the London Stock Exchange group. And I've seen the Stock Exchange group transform over the last decade, Jig, from something that runs markets like Stock Exchange and clearing houses to actually a very tech-driven business. It'd be great to get your insights on that. I've got Caroline van der Vels, who is the Chief People Officer for Danske Bank, based in Northern Ireland. And like so many people in the financial service sector around HR, brings a wealth of experience, not just from the sector, but from outside as well. And I think that helps us understand the opportunities that are out there. And finally, Claire Tunley, who is the Chief Executive of the Financial Services Skills Commission. Claire has seen this project through from its inception, having worked with me when we established task force, and now doing a great job in taking the work of the Commission forward. So let me just start off then with your opening remarks. So Katie, perhaps you first.
Happy to. Thank you, Mark. And thank you everybody for joining us today. The Capital One joined the Financial Services Skills Commission about a year ago, and I had the privilege of being introduced to Claire. And as soon as I hung up the Zoom call, I thought we absolutely have to be part of this, because this is the reality that I live in, the conversations that I have every day about how we continue to skill our workforce. And we want to be part of the broader conversation about what that looks like for the industry. So we're thrilled to be on the journey and to be part of the group. And as I read the report, it really resonates with me, because I spend a lot of my day talking about the things that Sharon was just talking about as well. How do we make sure that we understand where our business is going and the skills that are needed to achieve that, and figure out how to reskill and upskill everyone in the organization as a way to achieve that success. And I think the conversation about data skills that's in the report, about digital skills, about creativity, all of that resonates with what we're talking about and what we're trying to do as an organization. But the thing that's most evident to me in the report is we can make progress. However, it requires all of us to work together. And so we're thrilled to be part of the Financial Services Skills Commission and to be contributing to the insights, and then taking the insights from the report as well and figuring out what are the things that we're doing today that we need to amplify, what are the things that we're not doing that we can learn from our colleagues and continue to contribute to making sure that the industry has a large and diverse pipeline of talent. So we're thrilled to be part of this, and I've learned a lot from the report and the research that's in there.
Thank you. Hi everyone, Jig Ramji. Really thrilled to be part. Oh, do I need to turn it on? Is that better? User error. Okay. A skill that I perhaps don't have. No, really thrilled to be part of this as well. I think in particular for me, what's really pertinent is that the financial services sector is going through such a significant transformation, and the work that we do, Mark, relating back to some of your earlier comments, the organisation itself has transformed so much, and we really are almost sitting at a hybrid of financial services and telco, and tech. And of course, tech has such a significant competitive advantage over our industry in many ways, because it's seen as the glamorous one. And yet we are competing for the same skills, for the same talent across the globe, and that talent is in short supply. So I think working together as a collective to not just think about skills for the future, skills for the medium term, skills for the longer term, and how we build that within our industry, but it's also trying to attract a different type of talent into this sector in a way that I think we've lost ground over the last 10 to 15 years. So really thrilled to be part of this, and I think as a collective, we've got a lot of work to do to truly make this happen for our industry.
Good morning, and I'm delighted to be here as well. I've flown across from Belfast this morning. I am the Chief People Officer with Danske Bank, which is a predominantly Northern Ireland based bank, but we also extend into business lines in the UK as well. And we've been on the journey with the Financial Services Skills Commission now for a couple of years. And I think the value to us is that there's layers of value within that context. So the outputs from the reports are really helpful to distill in a faster and more efficient way, which direction boards need to go, and giving plans, structure and blueprints. But I think the other element, which we were talking about this morning, is actually the networks that you create. And the sense within the Financial Services Skills Commission that we're not competing with each other. If we all work together, and to Sharon's point, the tide will rise in terms of sort of the UK PLC's position and the skills strengths that we've got. So I think it offers a fantastic opportunity, and it also offers some really unique and critical outputs as well. And the Future Skills Report today is a really good piece of evidence alongside the skills framework and the other products that have been launching over the last number of years. For us, I think, you know, the content that is in there as an organisation that contributed to that aspects such as technology and some of the tech skills in there is a bit of a no-brainer, probably not a surprise to many, but I think for me the intrinsic interest in this is around behaviour, because actually technology is one piece, but only that plus behaviours is really going to make a sustainable difference and sustainable shift. So for us, I think the outputs and the emphasis on behaviours as well as technology skills is really important for us in Northern Ireland. We're in a market where actually in our employment market, they're sitting at 2.4% unemployment. 1 in 4 jobs last year was technology based, so it's super competitive, and organisations must get that right. With unemployment at 2.4%, the key actually is upskilling and reskilling and looking at creative ways to help people get the technical skills as well, but very much to get to that journey, focusing on the behavioural skills too. So it's delighted to be part of the journey, and it's been a really interesting process as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. You've already heard from me this morning. I think it's great to hear from people in the Commission that they find value in membership. If you're not a member, come and find me later. And so I've led this work for the last few years, and I continue to be excited by the findings and the work we're doing. And this is only driven by members and their input. And it is a collaboration. It is about finding what the industry needs. So the data in the report is drawn from what members are forecasting. It comes from the firms themselves. It's showing us that demand for each of the 13 skills that we've identified is growing. Supply is growing as well, but it's not growing as quickly as demand. So the gap is widening. And these are the 7 technical skills and the 6 behaviours that we've identified. It's growing faster for particular areas. So machine learning, that's where it's growing the most. The behaviour where there's growing demand is coaching. And that's a new skill that we introduced last year. And there is a great deal of investment in coaching, but lots of firms are telling us they want to expand coaching behaviours and coaching skills across the entire workforce, not just for managers and leaders, but for everybody. We are seeing the drive for tech really shift those skills to demands. It is continuing to grow, and I think something Sharon mentioned, the conclusion we draw is that there are great efforts underway. Everyone is doing this in some way, but we need to do more. And we need to go a bit faster because we are going to get left behind and not have the skills we need to drive transformation, to drive innovation. And I think one of the things I always come back to is when looking at skills, there's 4 Bs. People will have heard this before. You build, you buy, you borrow, or you bot. But to embed any of those approaches, you need skills within the organisation to do that. And the build piece is where we focus, and even the build piece, we need to look at not only the most critical skills areas where we've got shortages in software development, data analytics roles, but we need to upskill the entire workforce in those capabilities to a greater or lesser extent, because that will support transformation at a wide scale.
You've answered my first question, which is about buy versus build. So can I just ask a question? So this challenge about how firms build the skills that they need, to what extent do you think from the work of the Commission, do we think that boards get this?
That's me.
It is this, right?
It would be good to hear from some of our panelists as well. I think at the scale of the challenge and the nature of the challenge, yes. But I go back to a statistic that comes from PwC research on 74% or thereabouts of CEOs agree that skills is a crucial issue, but only 14% have a programme to address it in terms of reskilling. So yes, it's understood as an issue. And I think the fact that the Commission, we started out with 15 members, we've now got 39 in 3 years, membership is growing, people get that they need to focus on this. But the challenge is then doing it, having a programme of reskilling, and Sharon sort of touched on it. So getting the programme right, identifying the pathways, getting learners on board, getting leaders on board, getting managers on board, and delivering it is the challenge. And that's very much the focus of the work with our members, is that how can we all understand what to do? How can we learn from each other and drive that? So yes, I think it is something that leaders get, boards get, but actually the delivery needs to up the pace.
Okay, thank you. And then perhaps just talk a little bit about the behaviours. And we talked about in the report, and you mentioned it, Claire, that coaching was a skill that we added to the framework last year. Caroline, should you talk about some of the coaching programmes that you've done at Danske Bank and how they've added value to the workforce?
No, absolutely. And I think as we've gone through COVID and financial crisis and supply chain challenges, I think when we sat down to think about how we were going to get our leaders well and leading well outside COVID, coaching was a core fundamental tenet of that. We did a lot of work with Hull Dashridge and thinking about how can we make leaders more adaptive, and obviously coaching is one of the key levers to try and improve adaptiveness and resilience as well. But I think so much change has happened. We didn't necessarily have all of the answers, and part of actually coming up with the right solutions and creating a learning organisation is actually listening first and foremost, and listening to the experience that people have been through, and hackathons, different tools and techniques you can use within that environment. Coaching came up front and centre, the only way in all of this busyness, but actually leaders couldn't make all the decisions, and we needed to empower colleagues across the organisation to be able to come up and actually to with some of the solutions role in leaving that to leaders. So it's a bit of a cultural change for us, the organisation. I think we've done that in a number of ways. One, through the adaptive leadership programme that we've run. Every leader across the entire organisation has been through that. They diagnosed the problems, they diagnosed solutions. Within that, the coaching infrastructure has been really helpful in shifting mindsets as well. I think the second piece is thinking about that coaching capability for leaders from day one, from their earliest leadership experiences, and how do you actually instill that, and then also how do you measure that as well, because people don't know how they're progressing unless you can put that on a scale. And we ask every employee in the organisation what is their experience of their leaders coaching them. And that gives us some really good granular data, one, to help inform a development plan for the leader as well. And actually it makes it matter. And I think the final bit, coaching comes in all guises. It can be executive coaching, but actually unlocking that kind of coaching capability within your internal panels as well, supplementing that with great partnerships and relationships externally. But I think measurement and making it matter, making sure the skill framework is there and the foundations are laid.
And how do you sort of measure the impact it's had?
I think there's a number of ways. There's a huge number of ways. You can look at your levers and reasons. You can have a look at how people have progressed, and have a look at how their performance has built and grown and how well they're doing. Your example of Caroline, great name. In terms of that, took some coaching to get that individual to a place where they could have that conversation. So I think we can measure that in terms of promotions and the amount of skills internally. But I think there's a huge amount of employee data that comes through as well. And actually simply asking people their experience of coaching and how informative that has been, how helpful and how that's helped them deliver their career upward is what we use that data intensely across the organisation to make sure that people are really aware of where they are in terms of their coaching capability, and also to help guide their performance framework from there.
Okay, that's great. And you mentioned leadership a couple of times in your answer, Caroline. And Katie, I know that you've done some leadership work at Capital One. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and the benefits that it's brought?
Happy to. We also have a long history of looking at and developing coaching skills. And I think that the foundation of our focus on leadership comes from the fact that our talent model places equal emphasis on what somebody does and how they do that. So I love to see the fact that the skills report is talking about both technical skills and behavioral skills. Like many of you, we have a number of bespoke programs that help people develop on a variety of leadership skills at various parts of their journey and at various parts of their careers. And we get a lot of positive feedback about being able to take people out of the day-to-day chaos that they might feel with everything that's going on, and have an opportunity to focus on themselves and learn new things. We introduced a quarterly session where we bring our people leaders together to give them an opportunity to do that reflection. And I think the biggest thing that I hear from people leaders of all of the things that we do to invest in developing leadership skills is that they enjoy the opportunity to talk to other leaders and to hear about their experiences, and to come together and build a network and have somebody who they can go to and say, this is what I'm going through. How do I continue to upskill myself when I'm in the moment trying to solve something? So we find that bringing our community together really helps them learn from each other. Developing leadership skills is something that's never done. It's a constant evolution and a constant learning. And so when we bring that group together, we think about the fact that we're all learning from each other, regardless of how much experience you may have in the traditional sense as a leader. The other thing that we've done at Capital One is we've talked for a long time about everyone being a leader. So we have this concept of lead from where you are. And no matter what role you're in the organization, and what level you're at, and whether you have direct responsibility for leading teams, or not, we all play a leadership role in moving the organization forward and in creating the culture and the talent model that we have. So we've tried to instill as part of our culture that everyone is a leader and everyone needs to focus, to Caroline's point, on how you partner with others and how you can coach and support. And we've made that a really deep and ingrained part of our culture, in addition to bespoke development programs that help people really learn new skills and then have the safety to apply and experiment with those when they are going back to leading their direct teams or their project teams.
That's really helpful. Thank you. I think that sense of that's space to share and space to try is quite an important part of this, isn't it? Try and create that collaborative environment, and that's, I think, one of the strengths the Commission has brought, the opportunity for people to share their experiences and for us to learn from them. Jig, you talked about LSEG and in its change and the intersection between tech and financial services. How do you think about the upskilling and reskilling in the context of how much of a specialist does someone need to be? How much does a leader need to know about machine learning or AI to do their job, and how much do you have to rely upon specialists, and where do you draw the line between literate and a specialist?
About 7 questions in there. Sorry. I think the reality is we're a very diverse organisation now to perhaps the inception of the London Stock Exchange 300 years ago. And I think with that complexity and diversity comes a range of skills and roles that we need across our different business divisions and portfolios. So I think I very much see us as a fintech, but you could sit in certain parts of the organisation and actually still feel very financial services to some extent. And you can sit in some parts of the organisation and feel very data and analytics. So the reality is, I think the only way that you can truly understand the full holistic sphere of what exists within the organisation, and this might sound quite daunting, is to truly understand every role within the organisation and what skills are required across every role within the organisation. And we did actually undertake that, and we had the opportunity to do that when we brought 2 quite distinct organisations together, LSEG and Refinitiv, when we acquired them. And so by doing that, we started not only to see the diversity of skills that we had across the board, but we also started to see the proficiency levels, as per your question, that was required across some of those roles. And only by doing that, we could truly understand whether some of it was about literacy and some of it was about deep domain expertise. But what it also, and I think this is the most important part of doing this exercise, gave us, and going back to your point, Claire, around the 4 Bs, there's almost a convergence of the 4 Bs these days. And because there's that convergence, we started to understand the skills adjacencies that existed within our organisation. And by doing that, it almost gives you a jump start in many cases of reskilling people. because by identifying those adjacencies, they may not have the exact skills, but actually the building out of that skill or reskilling becomes a lot easier, or in some ways is a much more straightforward exercise than starting from scratch. So I think it would be remiss for us as a data and analytics company not to have a heavy reliance on that data to start to identify those patterns and how we can actually understand how we move talent around, how we reskill talent across different areas to truly almost meet the supply and demand challenges within organisation, and then actually what we need to buy from outside. So we took a real data and analytics approach and an evidence-based approach to start looking at the skills that existed, what we needed going forward, and that proficiency level across the organisation, rather than a historic approach, which was quite frankly to buy.
And I think one of the things that I think comes out in this report is that those firms that do plan and do think about this are more likely to find the skills that they need. So it's a very conscious, deliberate effort that takes you from skills forecasting to the right type of training and that ability to build rather than to buy.
But I think that's a really good point. And I think that forecasting piece, you almost have to spend a disproportionate amount of time doing the forecasting. And I think we all have seen within organisations we spend a disproportionate time recruiting and disproportionate amount of time developing or reskilling, but probably don't spend enough time forecasting.
So good tip for everyone listening. Now, opportunity to ask questions in the room and online. I think if you want to ask a question in the room, if you just put your hand up in the old-fashioned way. I think there might be a microphone. Whilst you're cogitating on your questions, and this lady there has got one, so whilst someone goes with that microphone, let me just ask a question from the online audience first. And it's a question that came up a couple of times on the chat box about the ability of people to meet your needs. So actually, if you were to look outside, which organisations help you meet the needs, the skills needs identified, whether that's technical or behavioural. I think about the role of training providers and professional bodies in that. So I've sort of synthesised 2 or 3 questions. So perhaps Jig, I might ask that of you first.
Having been through that exercise and actually seeing my good friend Tim Payne in the audience from KPMG, who did actually help us with a lot of this work that we were doing at LSEG, I think we have used partners in an effective way to understand landscape, external organisations, but also then bringing their expertise inside to help us with that skill forecasting and understanding how we would meet the demand of our organisation going forward. So I do think there's a range of people, whether it's consultancy, training providers, academies that develop certain skill sets and capabilities which would sit within our most scarce skill sets that we're looking at within the report. I think there's a range of people who can help. But the critical part of it is you need to be part of that journey, because the context, the behaviours that I think we've also talked about are also as critical as the actual technical skills required.
Okay, thank you. Caroline, perhaps I could just ask you to give a perspective from Northern Ireland about the skills ecosystem there, the link between governments, colleges, universities and business.
Delighted to. We have a history of collaboration really with the universities, very strongly encouraged by support from government as well, given the backdrop of Northern Ireland. So in terms of the government has a 10x strategy on growing the economy, and there's a 10x skills strategy supported to that as well. And clearly the universities are very much a part of that. I think where we really see the differences that they make are the technical skills, because I think there's many providers out there, both in terms of universities, but also in terms of Costera and some of those interventions for the technical skills. And I think when we think about the turnover at the moment in the market, we think about early careers, and we particularly would work with them on higher level apprentice programs. We've got around about 8% of our population actually on higher level apprentice programs. Some of those are new entrants, they kind of younger, earlier in their careers, but increasingly what we're also seeing is it's been a really useful tool to leverage reskilling and upskilling in terms of looking at those digital qualifications and specific sets, perhaps that's sustainability qualifications, and also in terms of fintech as well. So I think we've got to, because of the market that we're in. We look at some of the statistics of the challenges that we particularly face. Technology, I've mentioned, is one with the highest concentration of fintech employees in Northern Ireland in the whole of the UK. And with a historically low, about 58% lower unemployment rate. We've got to work in partnership, and that's very much for Northern Ireland PLC as much as it is for Danske Bank, and obviously funding as well. So really unlocking some of that funding through the universities and some of the broader NI specific programmes as well.
Okay, that's great. So the front has got the microphone.
Hi, hello.
Yes, perfect.
My name is Kezia. So if we had a solution that touched on a lot of the issues that you've mentioned here, reskilling, soft skills, diversity, inclusion, how would we get in touch with you?
With the commission, you can find me on LinkedIn, or there's an email address on our website. Absolutely, yeah, very happy to talk. Come and chat later.
Any other questions in the room? Yes.
Thanks. Would be interesting to hear from the firms how you've aligned your skills strategies with your strategies for diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Kate, I'm going to hand over to you first.
I'm happy to share one example. So we have a program called Career Switcher, which will sound, I'm sure, familiar to things that many of you have, which is specifically focused on reskilling individuals into software engineering roles. And the core purpose of that was to create a more diverse pipeline into those roles for Capital One. So we offer internal and external folks the opportunity to apply for this program and have very tailored training that then sets them up to be part of our software engineering organization going forward. And we've seen a disproportionate number of women who have applied and been very successful through that program, which is directly linked to our objective to grow the representation of women in our technology and software engineering workforce. So we've designed some very, very specific programs, starting with technology, where we see the biggest differences in gender representation, in order to make sure that we're very focused on how we, in particular, set those folks up for success, to have the skills. I think that's first and foremost, have the skills and knowledge to perform the role, and then scale over time as we learned, what success looked like for those folks. So that's just one example, but identifying a diversity related outcome that we want, and then building a skill focused program that's helped enable that.
I think it's such a complicated question in many ways, because I think our need to marry up our diversity agenda often depends on which element of the demographic we're trying to address. So a couple of examples, maybe just to give you a flavour. One of the big pieces obviously will always be gender in tech roles. We are probably slightly higher than the average, but again, a huge disproportion of men within tech roles comparative to females. So I think one of the things that we have done is we've actually tweaked our early career strategy, and rather than have very specific generic programs, we've actually gone down a much bigger specific pathway, or a specialist pathway, and we've doubled down on engineering roles in particular, and data and analytics roles, because that's where we find that we can find the talent at early careers, and then actually grow them within the organisation. The other piece of it is we've also started just opening up our organisation and attracting people in from an early age to the London Stock Exchange Group, way before school age, way before employment age, rather. we have been bringing babies into, but no, way before people are starting to look at careers, because I think what we notice when we go out to the market is people don't feel that the London Stock Exchange Group is accessible for all. And that's a brand thing, that's a assumption-based piece. And so the more we can actually open our organisations up to diverse talent, I think they'll start to look at that as an organisation that they could potentially aspire to work in when they're ready. So those are a couple of things that we've done. And within non-tech, we've tried to move people very similar to, I think, what you said, but we have specific feeder business divisions and functions where we feel that their skills and capabilities can be grown in a sales division or account management, again, where we find that there is a lack of diversity sometimes in certain markets.
Claire?
Yeah, just to add a couple of points on there, but what we're seeing firms do is, and it comes back to data and Duke's earlier remarks, that by knowing where the skills need to be and who you've got in the organisation, you can create much more purposeful programmes to move that talent around with an eye on diversity and inclusion in particular. And so, for example, the skills framework that we developed with 13 skills, that provides clarity on where people need to be and how they upskill and what good looks like, which just takes out some of that guesswork and some of that subjectivity of some of those assessments. So I was on a webinar for Progress Together that looked at socioeconomic diversity just yesterday, saying by having a structure and more clarity about the journey, the gap, where people need to develop, that enables you to then look at that pipeline and build that more diverse pipeline as well. So I think some of the tools are enabling that more purposeful work. So purposeful quite a few times in there, but that clear intention. Mark, if I may, can I just quickly maybe mention a couple of things that we found that didn't come up in the research and the data from the report on skills? Because I think when we've previously done this work, we've had new skills come through very clearly, and we've added those to the framework. And with the data that we got this year, or just in the last 6 months, there wasn't a complete addition of new skills. It very much doubled down on the skills we've already identified. And it was really clear that those are still the priorities for firms. So we don't feel that we have to retire or deprioritise any of those skills just yet. We are keeping an eye on the data, but firms have really said, yes, these are still priorities. There are a couple of new skills that may be irrelevant, and we're going to do some more work on that over the coming months to just really test whether they are relevant for the whole sector. So skills around customer centricity, for example, and commerciality has come up as well. But again, we need to do a bit more work on that to decide if they are additions to our framework. I think that leads on to another area that I thought was quite interesting in the data, is that drivers such as customer centricity and consumer duty, as well as ESG and focus on sustainable finance, really that are having relevance to the skills that firms are prioritising. So there's a little bit in the report around skills for ESG, which comes from the data, and we've identified 7 of our existing skills that firms are saying this is relevant to ESG, and they include things such as relationship management and data analytics in particular. And these are so crucial for underpinning the shift to net zero and the work that firms are doing at the moment. And we are going to do, again, more work looking at that to check whether that set of skills is the right set of underpinning skills for ESG. There's a lot of knowledge in there, and we haven't brought the knowledge in. There's lots of organisations that we work with on the knowledge side. But from a skills point of view, we're starting to see those skills draw out because of these other drivers. So I just thought it's helpful to make those points.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Claire. There's a questions come in about, there's like a 2-part question about the levy and about time. Perhaps I might start, Caroline, with a question to you about how do you encourage people to put time aside to learn? So we all have to, in financial services, do lots of mandatory training, which is a good thing, clearly. But we need to do more besides that. We won't reskill and upskill us. So how do you get people to put more time aside for that essential work of upskilling and reskilling?
Yeah, I think the research in the report showed 3 days a year on average is what's devoted to learning in most organisations, and of that 1 day is mandatory. So clearly that's not enough. It doesn't have enough impact, and certainly we're not going to win the war for skills if we carry on in that way. But I think we can focus on quota and the number of hours that we're devoting to it, but many of us can fill our time doing lots of hours doing training, but not necessarily be engaged in that, and it may not actually matter to ourselves and our career paths, but also to the organisation's success as well. So I think in terms of making it matter, the first piece is leadership buy-in from your board down, and that means that your learning budgets and so forth absolutely need to be cut based on the skills that you will need to add value to the business in terms of both competitiveness, but also in terms of surviving. I think the second piece is more cultural. I think it's about how do you weave in learning as something which your leaders have a conviction about. So how do you really make sure that your leaders are leading from there, and is that naturally part of the day-to-day conversation? In terms of performance appraisals, do you sit down and talk about learning? Do you set goals, and do you make it matter in terms of progress and in terms of actually what really distinguishes outperformance? And I think the other piece is just reconsidering whether it is just in our space, but actually thinking about those micro moments of learning as well, and actually how do you bring those into conversations that people do realise that that's a learning moment and a moment to take something away on. And then I think the other piece is how do you sort of build out across teams, because you've got individually based learning, but also team based learning as well, in terms of team recognition and measurement of that in a way that's not just simply RT based.
Okay, thank you. Can I just ask a linked question to either Jake or Katie? It's about the use of the levy, apprenticeship levy, which is a slightly different funding mechanism in England to Northern Ireland. Is the requirement to put time aside a challenge to using the levy, or are there more fundamental challenges?
For us, I don't think it is a challenge around setting aside time, but I think just related to what you were actually saying, the one other piece of the puzzle, I think, is the outcome piece. And then going back to Sharon's beginning, it was about how that learning or that reskilling has actually led to an outcome of career development. And I think when we approach any type of thing, including the levy, with a view of career development and growth, I think it's not really a barrier. I think sometimes there's a perception that if I lose this individual for X percentage of a week, then I'm losing time to do a role. Whereas actually it's a reconfiguration of actually that's what we should all be doing in order to continue to develop ourselves for the outcome of growth, skill development and progress of the organisation. I think once people have had experience of individuals who are doing it and see the progress they make, then actually we've actually seen a complete breakdown of that barrier.
Katie, do you have?
Thanks, Mark. I mean, one of the things I would add that we talk a lot about internally is if we know the future skills that we need for success, how are we actually creating rotational experiences for people to go and do jobs that help them build that and break down some of the risk that may be perceived in, I identify as a finance professional, for example, but actually going and working in a product management role and learning more about the skills and experiences, in that part of the business are going to set me up for more options, for my career in the future. So I agree with a lot of what's been shared, and we've also been starting to really challenge ourselves on if we can tell the story of these are the skills that somebody needs to unlock more career opportunities for them going forward, or these are more of the skills that we need across the organization rather than concentrated in a small few. We need everyone to have these skills. Creating stories that demonstrate there's less risk to rotating around and then actually learning those things in your day job, I think is a really powerful thing that we've seen at Capital One, and that I would encourage others to consider as well, because on-the-job learning is so powerful and you can connect the dots when you do that kind of rotating, and that's one of the strongest ways that we've seen our ability to create people who then farther along in their careers really have a lot of the skills and experiences that we're talking about today and can teach those to others.
That's super. Thank you. Can I just add?
Yeah,
I think that's a really good point, because sometimes Spotify tells me which artists I should listen to because I've been listening to certain artists. Netflix tells me what I should be watching because of the preferences I put forward. So if I put forward what career growth I want, where I want to go in my career, and whatever tools we have, or our tech tools tell us that these are the skills and the learning that will help you get there, there's a great propensity and chance that people will start to learn with a view of that outcome.
That's a great way of thinking about it, isn't it? The lady at the back. Hi. Why don't you press the button? Yeah, you can. Yes, perfect.
To have a
Right.
personalised career journey. Want to just get your take on How do you strike that balance between an individual designing their career within the organisation and balancing with what the organisation needs in terms of the skills and to remain competitive? Just wanted to get your kind of advice and what the report says about that tricky balance.
Oh, great question to end on. So, Caroline.
I think in the current employment market, there is an absolutely healthy tension between what an employee wants and where they want to explore their career path within the organisation, and also marrying that up to what's really fundamentally critical to organisational success commercially. I think there's a number of ways you can do that. I think firstly, it's giving the employee access. We're part of the experiment at the moment with a company called What If, which is Quigley Careers. So it's one way to help people explore roles that exist in the organisation and within a managed framework. So, for example, running experiments where you can get people to shadow technology careers and change their mindsets around what that might mean for them. And it's been super important around our reskilling and so making sure we're taking people whose skills perhaps aren't going to be as relevant in the future and opening up their access to some of those possibilities. And again, through those experiments, we've seen around about 97% of people opt to take different career paths than whenever they first came in with some of their beliefs into that. And I think you can control that and you can target that into areas that, one, you've got a lower supply chain in there, but also in terms of offering those opportunities in and then aligning your learning budgets to that, aligning the skills programs to that as well. So I think giving an employee access needs to be where it starts. It's not going to be a long-term sustainable solution unless that is a partnership and you can actually try and manage both. But that would be one example.
Jenny?
Related to the last thing that I talked about, I think sometimes people don't truly understand what a role within certain areas looks like. So if you can kind of identify adjacencies, which I talked about beforehand around skills, you can start to say, if you enjoyed this, then you might actually enjoy this, and therefore opens up the opportunities for people that they never considered because they just didn't have the understanding of what that role would entail and the skills that you'd require. So I think many of our employees simply just don't know enough about the different roles that exist within the organisation and what those skill sets, capabilities are within those roles. And I think that understanding and that education and that openness and transparency can start to introduce people to pathways that they perhaps haven't identified in their kind of aspirations initially, but could potentially change the way they think about their careers at an organisation.
Thank you. Katie, how do you think that leaders work their way through these challenges, that tension between individual appetite and the business needs?
Well, my first reaction is they use their coaching skills. Because those are tricky conversations. You as a leader or a manager of a team who's accountable to delivering and doing something need to have a pathway in order to do that and see that result be delivered. I think at the same time, you want to understand what is it that the people you're working with aspire to do with their career. Yeah. What is it that's holding them back? What's the story in their head about what they want to do versus what they think their role is asking them to do? And so I think coaching is a really powerful tool for leaders to use. We oftentimes talk about people defining the work that they do within a box and then break the barriers of that box and think about how they could contribute in a bigger, more impactful way to the organization. I think that oftentimes can open up more awareness of some of the things that we've heard about. What are other roles that are adjacent to mine or of interest to me? And how could what's the biggest impact that I could have? Oftentimes that kind of conversation between a leader and somebody they're working with can at least open the door to talking about, well, if you invested in this skill or if you took an opportunity to spend time, focus on something else, it may then present a new career path or a new career opportunity that you're really excited about and interested in.
Thank you. And I would declare whether from the work we've done as Commission, and thinking perhaps about the skills forecasting work, what insights that provides that helps address this challenge.
Yes, thank you. It's a core problem, whose responsibility is it to reskill the individual or the organisation. And I think
the answer is probably a bit of both. And we've started a bit of work at the Commission on learning culture. How do you create a learning culture in organisations? And it's not a straightforward answer. We don't have the full answer, but we know it's a mixture of having the right leadership, having the right learner engagement, and having the right systems and tools in place. And the systems and tools are getting more exciting by the day. Claire, colleague from Microsoft, is here, and we've been talking about, the learning and the flow of work and making it at your fingertips. And I think there's way more tech that's going to be available to try and embed that, so the answers are at your fingertips. But it does take a partnership, and I think Jake talked about pathways and having that clarity of the journey that's open to you, and then you making the decision as an employee about whether you're going on that learning journey with the organisation, putting your own time and effort, but also being supported by the organisation, is really where that sweet spot is. And so again, to create that pathway, you have to forecast, you have to identify the skills. Like I said, we've created a framework that enables organisations just to cut and paste into their analysis and their forecasting of what those pathways look like. So it is that clarity. Some firms are looking at very curated learning. We've heard elements of that today. So it's conversations in this work that we're continuing to do at the Commission with the members, my fellow boy band members on the stalls here. We do a little bit of that boy band. It's work that we continue to do over the coming years. But it is that partnership between the employer and the employee and getting that right.
That's great. Thank you, Claire. I think my boy band days are over. I want to just wrap this up now. It's been a really great conversation. I think a couple of points come out from this for me. Whilst as firms are all making huge efforts to upskill and reskill, the demand for those skills is exceeding supply. And that's something so we need to double down on our work to work collectively and individually to address some of the skills deficits that we're seeing. I think one of the messages that comes out from the answers we've had today is actually just how thoughtful and purposeful and deliberate this needs to be. This is not going to happen by chance. Otherwise, if it thinks to happen by chance, you're going to end up in the buy rather than the build. And we know from the work we've done on the business case reskilling, building your own skills is far cheaper and more effective than buying. So we do need to be very thoughtful. As a commissioner, we've sought to provide some thinking around that, but actually it relies upon firms to do that embedding and to benefit from the experiences of each other. And I'm very grateful to the panelists for sharing their experience today, to Katie, Jig, and to Caroline, to Claire. So thank you very much for participating in this. I'd like to thank Sharon and her team at Lloyds Bank for putting this on, but Sharon, for your leadership of this work stream. You said you arrived at the minute before midnight, often the most important minute to arrive. But thank you for your leadership. And thank you to those of you who've joined online and here in the room for participating. It's been a really important event for us. It's an important report. There's lots of learnings in there, but a great springboard for those upskilling and reskilling conversations. So thank you very much, everybody.